What if the next African giant isn't a country or a tech startup? What if it's honey? San Diego 2021. Nohemie Mawaka, a Congolese-Canadian, is working in tech and living comfortably, while her father keeps shipping her raw honey from the DR Congo. At first, she's just selling jars at a farmer's market in California. Then she notices something bigger. Most of the honey in America isn't real honey. It's being imported from China. But real African honey is sitting untouched back home. So Nohemie leaves Silicon Valley, moves back to DR Congo, and starts building Lubembo, an agricultural company connecting African farmers to global buyers. With honey and other superfoods like hibiscus, moringa, baobab, and many more, Lubembo has successfully built agricultural networks across multiple African countries, attracting buyers wanting to buy 500,000 tons of African honey every year.
Don't fear the chaos of the continent, because if the Lebanese are building wealth, the Indians, the Chinese, I'm so sorry, what is our excuse?
As the world quietly races to secure Africa's agricultural resources, will the diaspora jump in or watch from the sidelines? Find out on this episode of Black and Borderless. So I want to start, off big, because what you're doing with Lubembo is really amazing. And I've been following you on LinkedIn for some time now and reading your posts. And you have a very interesting POV, I think, about being an entrepreneur in Africa. So I want to start off by kind of summarizing that POV for our viewers, right? So we have viewers all over the diaspora who are watching this, and who may, like you, may be considering doing business on the continent, or maybe considering relocating there. So if you had to give a TED Talk to our viewers, what would the title be and why?
I would say the harsh truth and opportunities of building back home. That would be the title.
Wow.
And why harsh reality / opportunities? Because it is harsh for those of us, because I am a member of the diaspora myself. It's a harsh reality, but the opportunity is very high risk, high reward. And that's just the reality of sub-Saharan Africa. And I think that's something that the diaspora needs to just be realistic on.
And let's talk specifically about the DR Congo, right? I want to talk a little bit about your background, so people kind of understand who Nohemie is, where you're coming from, and how you got to create Lubembo. So let's start about you as a person. Where did you grow up, and how did you find yourself on the continent?
Yeah. So I'm native from DRC, Kinshasa, born and raised. I left very young though. So now I'm in my mid-30s. I left when I was about 7 years old, 7.5, 8 years old, immigrated Canada. So my parents chose Canada because they just felt like they're both economists by training. So the choice was between Canada and Australia. And they just felt like the US, the inequities, the racial divide. That being said, the Canada has some issues that we don't talk about, but definitely not as prevalent. And so we immigrated Montreal. A couple of years in, now I'm in my teens. My mom is like, let's move to Ontario, the Toronto region, because I want my kids to speak English. That way they have an economic global advantage. And then from that point on, in my early teens, my mom was like, this kid is becoming spoiled. I need to humble her. So unlike most African parents that just like whip their kids, my mom will do that. But she sent me back to the DRC. And this time she made me live with my grandparents, who were living in a neighborhood who during colonial time was really affluent, but now very abandoned. So that was a reality check. I went back as an early teen in this low income neighborhood where I was sleeping on this tiny mattress. I had this like skin thing that developed from getting bitten by bugs. And I kept my cooler of like pogo sticks and hot dogs and burgers from the West. And I was gritting it on coil. And you have all these neighborhood people staring at me. But that trip was a game changer. It really gave me the fuel to pursue economic development for sub-Saharan Africa, specifically the DRC. And fast forward, I finished my education in Canada up until my master's. And then my first startup, I got Grandchild and Seed Fund to start what was revolutionary at the time, digitizing medical record east of DRC. That got me on Forbes magazine. And after that, I realized I was lacking some business acumen. So I went back to the corporate world in Canada, and then I worked in Silicon Valley. But then I had this itch one last time. So while I was in San Diego with a beautiful life, I call my dad and I say, I have this one last itch of entrepreneurship. This tech company in San Diego or in Silicon Valley, but I was working remotely, is laying people off. So I'm going to take my sovereign package and I want to come back. And so my dad's like, yeah, come back. So we bought land in our origin of Bontuntu in DRC, which I now turn into a beekeeping training site for cooperatives. And then we also do palm oil. And that's kind of a long story short of how I got here.
Wow, no, that's a really compelling story. Funny enough, I the same thing happened to me, but I was kind of the reverse. So I was born in Chicago to a Cameroonian mother, American father. I'm sorry, Cameroonian father, American mother, and then they sent me to live with my grandparents when I was 9 or 10 in Cameroon, and I was there for some time, and it was an interesting transition. But I don't remember it because I went there almost as a baby. But what I do remember is the transition coming back to the U.S. when I was about 10 years old. And that was interesting. I was literally practicing my American accent in the mirror so that kids wouldn't laugh at me at school. So I understand that transition, but I also understand this feeling of, because I lived on the continent as a kid, I have a connection to it that other diaspora kids who grew up in the US or in Canada don't have. And I always have this longing for it because I remember a time when I actually lived there and I can, I have strong cultural references to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you talk to your dad, you're working, have, your dream tech job, I'm assuming at that time, in Silicon Valley in California, and you have this itch. Was the entrepreneurial itch related to Africa specifically, or you just wanted to start a business in general, and then the Africa part came later?
No, ultimately what it was, it's always been Africa for me. Like I always been Africa, and really it's always been like DRC, the foundation, and then partnering with other neighboring African countries. And full transparency, while I was living in San Diego, working remotely for Silicon Valley, my dad was actually sending me raw honey from Congo. So he had a cousin that works with independent producers. And so to support him, my dad was buying honey from him. And then my dad is like, what do I do with all this honey? And then I did my research. At the time, the US was 40 cents short a person of honey. So a lot of honey in the US is actually from China and it's not real honey. So my dad was shipping it to me by air and I was packaging it in my studio and selling it at farmers markets and online. And so that I kept running out of stock. So me being me, I'm like, let me pack up. This company's laying people off and giving some packages. Let me move back to DRC and start producing honey. Now I'm like, girl, you are not meant to be a producer, but you are meant to control the deal flow as an aggregator. So that's kind of how that whole thing started. But for me, it's always been sub-Saharan Africa. It's logical. It makes sense. It's us. So yeah.
So that's a good way to segue to talking about Lubembo. So you start off by selling this honey, in farmers markets locally in the San Diego area. And then you decide to go and become a producer in DRC. So at that point, Lubembo was established. So you start off as a producer, and then now you decide at some point that, production is not for you. What made you decide that production was not for you and there was another opportunity there for you?
Yeah, so I think just to go back, like when I first started with my dad was sending it to me, he was buying it from a cooperative, which I think is the best model, to be quite honest. And then me being me in true entrepreneur fashion, this was pre-ADHD medication I'm on now, but I was like, I'm gonna produce, I'm gonna cut out the middleman. And you know what? These producers are not reliable. And I kept running out of stock because the producers that my dad was buying from, he was buying like 20, 30 kilos from them. And that was a lot from them because they're producing honey informally, not with traditional hives, not for commercial. So I was like, if we have to rely on these producers, I will never make 100K or 200K in sales. And I literally kept running out of stock in California. So I was like, let me produce. But then fast forward the last 4 years with this farm, oh my goodness, where can I start? But I realized for me, my biggest moat, my biggest leverage is being a bridge between the buyer and the producer. It just is. It makes sense. From the point of view of English, I have the language fluency. From the point of view of business, and this is a strength that the diaspora has that I find the diaspora doesn't tap into enough. You're really the best bridge because you psychologically, in the last 4 years, I was in DRC full time And it makes, for those listening, living in the continent full time is definitely different than coming in and out. So you get to reconnect with your culture, understand your culture, understand the strength of the producers, but the gap that they have. And I'm going to say something that's pretty on, like, maybe not orthodox, but a lot of buyers, whether that's the Western market in the US, Europe, or Gulf Arabia, they don't want to deal with farmers, especially not African ones, because what, first of all, how are they going to talk to each other? And when it comes to capitalism, a lot of our farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, they don't know how to negotiate. And then when it comes to the value chain of agriculture, you realize the producer usually is the least to make money in the entire value chain. And so
Hmm.
these Westerners, these people, Gulf Arabia, they're capitalists, they're going to want to extract the most out of Africa for the least amount of money. And so
Hmm.
for me, I realized I have 4 passports. That I do that. I get bored and I get passports. I have 4 passports, and it allows me to, if there's a conference, if there's a buyer in this region, oh, the US is going to ish, let me swap and take a flight to Qatar. Like, I have that flexibility to meet buyers, tell the story of our continent, and then come
Hmm.
back to the continent and say, okay, producer A, B, and C, it's cute what you're doing, but how does Lubembo give you hives? How do we give you a smoker? How do we give you the gear? How do we give you the standard of traceability so that when a buyer from Qatar comes and is asking for acacia gum, is asking for acacia honey, you have the digital know-how to prove that what you've produced is competitive at scale. And that's
Hmm.
where Will has swapped to.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Going from being like a producer to being this kind of, Lubembo being this middleman between farmers or producers on the continent and, Western, or if you will, developed country buyers. So I would love to hear more about like who your first Western client was, like your first buyer and how that deal went. But before I get to there, what does Lubembo actually mean? Why that name?
That was my dad's idea. My grandpa, my dad's father, that's his middle name. My
Mhm.
dad's middle name and my brother's middle name. So
Oh,
my
wow.
dad's whole thing is that we need to build a family business that will live through generations. So that's
Hmm.
Lubembo.
Oh, awesome, awesome. So I'm assuming, is that Lingala or another DRC
Yeah,
language?
it's Kikongo, so Bantu,
Congo.
Kikongo. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. So the name kind of came from like, the family name and kind of keeping up this legacy. So tell
Yeah.
me about when you decided that you want to be this kind of middleman, this aggregator, basically closing deals between farmers on the continent, or let's say in this case in the DRC, and Western buyers. Who was the first buyer that approached you or that you approached, and what were kind of the ups and downs of that first deal that you had to make?
Oh boy. So the first few deals, I'm going to be honest, full transparency, our first real deal just happened in January. Because if you look at the trajectory of not this January, if you look at the trajectory of Lubembo, we went from the jars in farmers market, right? Proof of concept, side hustle while I was working in tech. Then the last 3.5, 4 years, I was in the production stage. And anyone that gets into agriculture will understand it takes years. It just does. Agriculture is not like startup in tech where overnight you take off. It doesn't work that way. And so the last 3, 4 years was establishing really my farm in Congo as a production site and a training site. And now we're also establishing a headquarter in Kenya where we're growing a network of producers. But that was really what I was focused on. So the switch to aggregator really only happened last year. And it really happened last July when I went to New York for the Specialty Food Expo. It's a really incredible expo that the US has twice a year. It's for specialty superfoods people. So I was going to pitch my honey jars. And I get there and I'm realizing the real gap is that there's literally no representation of Africa. And then I looked at the US economy at the time last year. I'm pretty good at market projection and like future thinking. I
Mhm.
look at the US market at that expo. I was like, there's so many direct to consumer brands and products. And I get it. Branding, packaging is where the markup is in the Western economy. But I
Mhm.
was like, it's going to be very hard to compete in the direct to consumer space as the economy is shifting in the US. So
Mhm.
my best leverage is actually to come in with the raw material already transformed in Africa, and then you sell it, and then you let the Americans rebrand and package. but the transformation and the production is in sub-Saharan Africa. And so for me, that's always a transition. So the moment I switched that, and that's really when I became more active on LinkedIn, the first buyer, so from this was July, September was when we got our first real offer. So my thing is honey, but I also do moringa, baobab, and hibiscus botanicals. So this was a German buyer, and they wanted 100 ton of moringa. And I kid you not, the sales price right now for organic moringa is like €7 the kilo, and they're asking for €3 the kilo. And
Wow.
the whole logic is that they deal with other African producers, they deal with other producers in Latin America that accept that price. Whereas me, I did the unit economics. I was like, as an aggregator, I need to make at least 30% commission. And then the farmers, they need to make something. And so this math doesn't make sense. And I know the German market very well because my grandmother lives in Germany. So I know the market very well of organic foods. I know they're gonna mark it up like crazy. So I was like, no, thank you. 3 more German deals came the following month, same thing. I was like, I can't. The last German deal was in November, and I was like, I cannot. Where they're like, we love what you're doing, blah, blah, but you're not organically certified. And I told them, I was like, you realize to be organically certified in EU standard, I would have to pay almost 20,000 euros as an exporter. The farmers have to pay the same price to be organic. You're dealing with Africans who, for the most part, lack of development means we don't have the luxury of GMOs yet. So I'm so sorry. How will a farmer in the middle of Cameroonian forests access
Genetically
GMO?
modified.
Please tell me, because the man is trying to access electricity. So GMO is the last thing the man is trying to get. But
Right.
that's when I realized I was like, okay, you guys are too much. And then in January, I went to San Diego to the same food expo. But this time, the pitch was I'm coming in as a supplier of honey, hibiscus, moringa. If you're a brand and you need the material and we transform in Africa, we'll be your supplier. And Lord behold, I closed 3 deals within 1 week.
Wow.
And one of them was a total of 1,500 pounds, which is not a lot, by the way. That's not a lot. 1,500 pounds. We closed that sale and we delivered. The second one was he wants 5 ton of honey 4 times a year. So we were able to get him 5 ton, and now we're trying to close on the following 5 ton. So that means a 20 ton deal in 1 year. The third one, we will not be able to supply. This company, they want 500,000 ton of honey every year. And I'm like,
Wow.
that would be 5 African countries because DRC has the land size to produce that kind of honey, but we don't have the infrastructure yet. So that one I had to turn it down. But those are the 2 that I was able to meet. And in terms of the process, believe it or not, the US is not as hard as people think it is. I think for me, because I lived in the US and I've lived in Canada, I understand documentation. I understand the whole licensing. Really, the thing is FDA, and I don't have the energy to deal with the FDA because when I worked in Silicon Valley, I was in pharma tech. So I used to deal with FDA all the time. So I found a third party that you pay a yearly fee. They got the FDA number. And for those listening, anything that you import into the US, especially when it's food and drugs, you have to have an FDA number, or else it either doesn't get onto the sea or when it gets to the port, they disregard it. So that was easy. But the hard part was this shipment was during the whole tariff for Trump. And the good thing about exporting that people don't realize, it's actually cheaper to export out of a country than to import because import is where the money is, especially in countries like Congo where we don't produce anything. So I have to say, yeah, the tough part was the tariff because the tariff is 15% on anything coming from honey coming from Kenya. No, 15% on DRC honey, 10% on Kenyan honey. So luckily for me though, the buyer, these are meaderies. Meaderies are honey wine. They take the honey, they transform it. And for them, they did a market research and they were like, we are confident that African organic honey is gonna sell through the roof for our wine. And they're right. So they ate the cost.
So these clients of yours or these buyers, are they typically, well, the ones that you've sold to so far, are they typically like small retailers? kind of farmers market-y, private companies? Are there some big retailers in there? Like, what's kind of like what does your roster look like in terms of buyers?
Yeah, and that shifted a lot, by the way. So when we were focused solely on our jars, which we still
Mhm.
have, but we're kind of phasing it out. But when we were focused on our jars, our target were the boutiques. These are, think of like LA, think of like downtown Houston, think of New York, the hipster boutique, which has like really premium markup. They were our
Mhm.
ideal customer. The problem with those retailers, I'm going to be on from my experience, they don't move volume. They're good for
Mhm.
branding, but they don't move volume. And
Mhm.
then with the raw honey, which is now our biggest focus, we actually decided that our target audience, and this has been the test, the German buyers was a good test run for me because I realized something. Meaderies are the perfect client for the honey. Why?
Mhm.
Because they take honey and they transform it into alcohol. And
Mhm.
the way honey wine works, the taste of the honey predicts the fermentation. So
Mm.
these value African honey because if you have African honey that's from acacia source, it has a strong taste. If you have African honey that comes from lemongrass, which is something that I do in my forest, it has a different type of taste. So when they ferment
Mhm.
it, and then when they do the markup, because it's wine, especially for African honey, they can mark it up to an increasing price that's 5 times higher than any local honey. So I
Mhm.
think for us, we realize our target client is that mid-sized entrepreneur that serves the middle upper class in
Mhm.
terms of transforming our raw goods. The same will be for moringa, for example. It will not be someone that just sells moringa powder. It will be someone that takes the moringa, transforms it into supplements.
Mhm.
Hibiscus will not be someone that just resells the leaf. It will be
Mhm.
someone that takes hibiscus that we were able to give them, they transform
Mhm.
it into kombucha. So
Mhm.
that really become our market.
And speaking of that, talking about all these African superfoods that you're selling or giving to buyers or producing. So moringa, hibiscus, honey. I remember like maybe let's say 10 years ago maybe 5 years ago when African superfoods became a thing in the US, right? People realized that Africa actually has superfoods that provide many health benefits. Or do you feel like it's a sustainable thing and why? Okay, let's say moringa and all of these superfoods, right? I feel like they've become some superfoods, at least in the US, have become trends, right? Like they are hot for a minute, and then all of a sudden they are not when the next best thing comes around. For the sustainability of your business as an aggregator, do you fear that the demand for African superfoods may decline at some point, or do you think it's a pretty sustainable thing, and why?
That's a very good question. I think here's the thing. Honestly, markets are always shifting. Like I think in the business world, if you have the mindset that what you're supplying to the market today will always be in demand for the rest of your life, I think that's foolish with all the respect. The only few commodities in history that maybe have stand to the test of time have been minerals, right? Gold, silver, and now everybody's into copper and cobalt for technology. But when you're dealing with food, really the only foods that sustain through time are usually staple food, right? And that's why in DRC, my dad and I, we also produce palm oil because we
Okay.
know palm oil has been in the game since beginning of time. Nigeria, they are the number one producer, and maize is another one. However, with superfood, to your point, that is valid. It's actually something that I've never really thought about. But I think for me, where I have a bit more confidence that I have a good decade at least to play in this game because when you look at the past superfoods like cocoa, which has some ethical issues in my opinion, but cocoa has been in the game for God knows how long, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Cote d'Ivoire has made Switzerland very rich.
Yeah.
So I
Yep.
think
Mhm.
cocoa is a
Chocolate
proven
sales. Yep.
probably
Mhm.
it has tested through time. Another one that people don't consider a superfood, but I do, is coffee.
Mhm.
Coffee has the wealth of Latin America, right? So I'm confident. And the reason why I am for the next at least decade or two is again, we're targeting those that transform what we make. We're not targeting the people that just take the superfood and sell it for markup. We're targeting the people that take it and transform it into something else for the consumer. And
Yeah.
that I think we have a bit of time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really interesting point, right? A nuance that people may not pick up. Yeah, that if you're just selling kind of this raw material, yes, moringa as a raw good, yeah, it may phase out, it may not phase out, but if it's being used to kind of power of the product, the way that minerals do, then it has like a longer time in the market, or more sustainable potential. I want to talk now about the Democratic Republic of Congo, because I think there's a story here about really a nation that's not known for agriculture. I think I saw a stat that you posted actually on LinkedIn, how I'm going to misquote you right now, so you can correct me if I do, but 95% of the exports, you're talking about something about like a port in the DR Congo, where 95% of the exports are like of wood, yet um, there's like an abundance of arable, of farmable land in the DRC, but the exports, agriculture exports, are maybe 5% or less, right? I think that's really interesting, because when I think of Democratic Republic of Congo, the first thing I think of is not agriculture. I do think of minerals. I do think of even entertainment. We think about artists that have come out of the country. How hard of a perception is that to fight when you are trying to sell honey from Congo for a country that's not known for agriculture?
Yeah, it's very tough. I think part of the reason why I did choose superfood was actually also because of that. So here's the thing. I have sort of the two brains now, right? Domestically, we're doing palm oil, and palm oil is so costly to produce, but it is so lucrative after 5 years.
Mhm.
I am like, I looked at my dad, I was like, you have set us up for good retirement, dad. We are set for life. But the next 5 years are going to be painful because it is so expensive in terms of investment. It is science, and the industrialization of the palm oil is also very costly. But
Mhm.
I think that the thing with agriculture, there's a few things. One, it's capital intensive. Two, agriculture is a game of scale. Anyone that talks about scaling a business knows that there's costs associated to it. And agriculture is a timing thing. So I
Mhm.
think that you take into account all these factors, and then you take into account the fact that Congo is not developed. We lack infrastructure. For God's sake, energy is a luxury. Roads are a luxury. And these are critical things that you need in agriculture. And this is why I chose honey for export, right? Because if you do the math with superfoods, a lot of superfoods, not all, but a lot of them, the production cycle is actually very low and not that costly. So, honey, for example, I have right now on my farm, I have four beekeepers that work full time. We have
Mhm.
120 hives. 120 hives ballpark, you're producing 1 ton of honey. With that, each of them now trains 20 independent beekeepers. Each of those beekeepers, we supply them with hives. How do we make the hives? From our trees. For every
Mhm.
tree that we get, we plant another one because I'm very big on sustainability and environment. But that just tells you that in terms of cost, I'm not having to import the hives. I'm not
Mhm.
even the gear, the beekeeping gear, which a lot of people don't use in Africa. We
Mhm.
make those locally. The
Mhm.
beekeeping glove, my seamstress, she's such a genius. She makes them from like tires. She takes the
Wow.
tire material somehow, makes it lighter, and turn it into gloves. So you understand that the whole production cycle is kept domestic, and then that reduces costs drastically. And then the thing with honey, the hives are placing them in the forest.
Mhm.
So I think that's the beauty of superfoods. The same applies with ginger, a major superfood that's extremely in demand. It's
Mhm.
not expensive. It's a root.
Mhm.
It's not hard to produce ginger. And the
Yeah.
same goes for moringa. Moringa has a 4 month cycle.
Mhm.
It's actually in 10 hectares of moringa, you're producing
Mhm.
over 2 tons of moringa.
Mhm.
So I think that's why superfood I would advise for agriculture, and we have the climate for it. And that
Mhm.
was really thinking when it comes to agriculture production and training independent folks in Congo, because I was
Mhm.
realistic that the environment lacks infrastructure.
Mhm.
Therefore, what can we produce that has a quicker turnaround, that
Mhm.
doesn't require too many equipments, that's not too hard, but that is in high demand in the West, and more
Mhm.
importantly, if we produce it locally at a decent quantity, like 5 ton is nothing.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
but I in history, I think someone said in the data, I'm the first to export honey to California, but literally that's not a lot. Like maize production, they're producing like 20 hectares, I mean 20,000 hectares of maize. Like
Mhm.
5 ton is nothing. But the margins of honey are super high
Mhm.
despite all the fees that I have to pay domestically to get it out of the country.
That's really amazing when you think about it, and how you basically, instead of wishing for infrastructure, found a way to leveraged the fact that there is no infrastructure and found crops or products that can thrive and you can still make a profit from without any infrastructure. Given that agriculture is not like a main export of the country, how supportive is the local government of companies like yours who are focused on agriculture?
I would say I have a bit of a contrarian take.
We love contrarian takes here. Let's do it.
I think I'm definitely Canadian. I have a Canadian passport. I grew up in Canada, but I think there's an American in me. I always say I have New York girl energy with California aesthetic. Like I have brim hats. Like if you see me in Nairobi, like I wear brim hats and it's a thing. But I think what I mean by that is there's something about the American people, not all, that they're very anti-government. I'm not saying that I don't think the government should do its job, but I think especially the diaspora, we tend to waste a lot of time and energy waiting for permission, waiting for the government to build. And so I go by more the contrarian take of start and then figure it out. And I think in terms of waiting for the government to support you, you need to be realistic. We are a private company. We are not a public entity. We're not an NGO, although I have a foundation piece, but really I'm a private company and I just need to focus on that.
No, that's totally fair. And I think, yeah, a lot of people, if you're waiting for the infrastructure or even the right government systems in place, you may never ever start. So now let me ask this. And as you can tell, I'm kind of obsessed about this idea of the DRC Congo being a place that I know for minerals that you're now focusing on agriculture on. Does Lubembo plan to expand into the mineral business, or do you think you'll stay in the agriculture space?
No, I'll stay in agriculture. Minerals is
Hmm.
true. Like, no, I'll say in agriculture, but never say never. Never say
Yeah.
never. Because, like I said, Lubembo, we're an aggregator, but we launched and generate Lubembo Intelligence, which has really taken off. And with Lubembo Intelligence, another part of the business people don't understand that we do, we help businesses de-risk market penetration into the DRC. And now we're also expanding to Kenya. So we do have a lot of people that solicitate us in terms of the mining industry that we turn down, but some it makes sense. Like I'll give you an example. There's one that recently reached out to us. They're out of France. They do a lot of soil monitoring and assessment, mostly in agriculture. However, something like that is actually very useful in mining as well. So something like a business like that for us that would make sense. And I do have some relationships in mining, but my thing is more agriculture. My thing is more logistics. I actually have two logistics company in DRC that people don't know about. I have trucks in Bandundu. That's how we move the goods that we produce. And during low season, we move goods for the domestic market. And we also have an air cargo company from Kenya to DRC that does air. So I think mining is not an interest. However, and if you see some of my posts and if you go on Lubembo Intel, what we've decided with Lubembo, we target producers that are along the mining corridor. Because whether we like it or not, mining what they've succeeded at, and I go in depth in this in my Lubembo Intel market analysis, the mining industry, whether you like them or not, that's not the point. What they succeeded is building infrastructure before extracting. So any mining corridor, you'll notice they have the roads. You'll notice energy. By the way, DRC right now is heavily focused on energy. You talk about government. This is one sector where the DRC government has delivered. So for those of you listening that want to build in DRC, the next 5 years, energy is your best play. They're handing out energy licenses like potato and hot takes. So go ahead, get that license and build an energy dam. And I think the mining industry has done really well in that. So for us, Lubembo, we decided when it comes to cooperatives, producers, we're going to target along the Lobito corridor because it just makes it easier in terms of infrastructure costs.
Oh, no, that's really brilliant. So basically taking another sector, which is mining, that already has infrastructure and basically geographically building the agriculture business around that. No, that I think that's a really brilliant strategy. I actually did read about that in one of your posts. Like I said, I read all your posts, girl. I know them from beginning to end.
Thank you.
So awesome. So let's play. We're gonna play a little game that we like to call Black and Borderless banter, and it's like where you fill in the blank. So I'll say something, make a statement with a blank, and then you repeat the statement, but with the blank filled in. So in 20 years, Lubembo will be the what of the agricultural sector in Africa?
The superfood leader. In
Uh,
20 years, Lubembo will be the superfood leader for the African continent.
awesome. In 20 years, the Democratic Republic of Congo will be the what of Africa?
In 20 years, the Democratic Republic of Congo will be the fastest growing African economy.
Wow, that's an ambitious goal. What is the one thing that makes you confident that that's possible in 2 decades?
There's two actually. It wouldn't be one.
Mhm.
It has to be two. So
Mhm.
one is just pure data, right? In the next 10 to 20 years, I believe Nigeria is going to be number one for sure. But number two is we're going to in terms of population size, we're going to grow faster than Ethiopia. So they're predicting that the population size is going to go to 500,000,000, about 400 million. We're already at over 100 million as we speak. So that's a fact. Number two, I think that we're the last frontier. We just are. You look at when I talk about frontier, you're Cameroonian, God bless Cameroon, but you guys don't have the population size or the land size that we have. And the reality is we're literally the last frontier, right? Like, and I think this is something that the diaspora needs to hear. And I'm very big on this, and I talk about this in my YouTube channel all the time. You do not build an economy, and building an economy requires businesses, right? This is why always depending on the government is foolish. Government is there for legislation, businesses were there to create capital. You do not build business or your wealth when the infrastructure has already been laid out. You build it in the mess as it's growing. And this is why, as a last frontier, we're going to be the fastest growing. I already know it. There's too many players want to get in, and they're going to get in. I just know
Yeah,
it.
that's pretty remarkable. And from your lips to God's ears, for sure. And we really look forward to seeing where the DRC goes next and how it kind of blossoms and evolves. And then the last thing I want to talk about is, although we've been talking mainly about the Democratic Republic of Congo because that's your country of origin and primarily where you do, business. We can't forget that you also export out of Kenya, so Nairobi, and I believe Ghana as well, and some other African countries. And another theme I found in kind of your points of view that you share on LinkedIn is how you believe that agriculture is not a one country sport in Africa, right? Because you're an aggregator, you believe that it's a combination of different countries coming together so that when one country cannot produce something, another country can. Or one country doesn't have the proper climate, another country can. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how critical is that for your business going forward?
Oh my gosh, it's super critical. Like a good example is even hibiscus. It's one of our core leaves that's in extreme demand in the West. Nigeria being the number one importer of hibiscus into the US market, and they're only maybe able to meet 3%. Like this is insane, right? Yes, Congo has the temperature to grow hibiscus. Heck, Congo has the temperature to grow everything. However, we don't have that growth yet. So if a buyer comes up to me, they want hibiscus leaf, I'm gonna tap into the Nigerian network and the Senegalese network. Another example is baobab. In Congo, Congo Central, just outside of Kinshasa, they have baobab trees. But I'll be kidding myself if I told you that we can supply 100 ton. And recently, a buyer approached us for 100 ton of baobab powder, where Senegal, they already have it. So I think that this is just a reality where I think the countries like Congo that don't have the infrastructure, but have the goods in smaller quantity, we price them as premium so that the margins and the unit economics make sense. And we partner them with smaller Western buyers. But for markets that really are playing the game of scale and really want that, we go to the African countries that are a bit more developed and we reach out to our network and we say, hey, this is what we need. And then how do we arrange some kind of ground visit? How do we make sure that we work with your suppliers? And so that's kind of why you have to play the game of multiple markets. Another great example is Kenya. Kenya has incredible infrastructure, but can you believe that this time last year, oh no, the 5 ton producer, the honey order, you realize I went up to a Kenya buyer, a Kenya producer of honey. Last year, climate hit them, 90% drought. So a lot of Kenyan producers were not able to produce honey. Number two, a lot of Kenyan producers, I think, and I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but a lot of times in Kenya, with the influx of Mzungus, white folks, there's this speculation of pricing that's now happening. They're out of touch.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it very hard. So you have to have multiple networks. And lastly, I will say I just think it's foolish to depend on one producer, on one market. It's just dumb because even one producer that I know, the one that was supplying us honey when we were doing the jars, we told them $3 the liter, which is the same price that you buy honey in San Francisco from a producer. So we priced them really well. 3 years later, the man has health issues, school tuition fees need to be paid. He wakes up and tells my operation manager, moving forward, you guys have to pay me $6 the liter. That's a problem because that's how much
Yeah.
it's costing us shipping. So these are things that you deal with, and that's why you want to have a network.
I found it to be a pretty interesting point of view about this kind of, having countries within the continent play off each other and kind of fill in the gaps where other countries cannot, and building your business model around that. So finally, Naomi, I know we're almost at time here. So tell me, if anyone who's watching this episode, what is the one takeaway point that you'd like for them to take away about what we talked about today? Like, if there's one thing you could say, you know what, if they don't leave with anything else, leave with this, fellow diasporans out there.
I actually think I'm actually going to go off a bit. We didn't really talk about it, but I think it ties really well with my story. I think the one takeaway for the diaspora is don't fear the chaos of the continent. Build, build in the chaos. That is the biggest thing that I can give away. And I talk about this in length in my YouTube channel for those of you that are interested in watching. But the diaspora needs to learn to embrace the chaos. And just to be clear, embracing the chaos doesn't mean you agree with it. I don't agree with none of the chaos happening in Congo. I really don't. No one can agree with that stuff. But you'll be fooling yourself if you don't see the opportunity in the chaos. And this goes back to my first sentence, right? The harsh realities and opportunities. Because if the Lebanese are building wealth, the Indians, the Chinese, I'm so sorry. What is our excuse?
Yeah.
And now we're turning into an era. I think the next 3 years, everybody, especially in the West, you better pack up your bags, boo, because the reality is going to hit everybody in the diaspora.
Yeah.
Now we just don't have an excuse. We cannot blame on colonization anymore because everybody's looking at us like, you guys have the information, you understand how your country works, rather than like being the moral police, try to work with it. And that's my advice to the diaspora. Work with the chaos.
No, I think that's really good advice. And yes, it definitely ties to how you started off this conversation, which is that the chaos, work alongside it, parallel it, because that's kind of where the magic happens, is in that chaos. If you come after the chaos, you're almost too late to the game, right? Or too late to the party. Thank you so much. Oh, Nicole is clapping for you for that one. Nicole said she's working in the chaos right now. She's
Nigeria. She's been through it. Trauma.
So she said, girl. Thank you so much, Naomi.